Can one night kill a man, even if no one touches him? On the Great Plains, the wind-carrying icy flakes was more terrifying than any enemy tomahawk or bullet. When the horizon disappeared in a white haze and the temperature dropped to deadly levels, there was no room for error. A lone traveler caught in a storm in an open field had to become part of the cold to survive. It was a duel not with an enemy, but with physics itself and the limits of the human body. Watch the video to the end to find out how ancient knowledge allowed warriors to wake up alive where modern man would freeze to death in an hour. What if I told you that panic kills faster than frost? In the culture of the indigenous peoples of the plains, the attitude towards cold was instilled from an early age as a living being with which one could negotiate. Fear causes an adrenaline rush, which makes the heart beat faster and expend precious energy. Rapid breathing leads to enormous loss of moisture and heat through the lungs. Therefore, the first rule of survival was complete, almost unnatural calm. A warrior who realized that a storm had caught him far from camp did not try to outrun the wind. Running in deep snow causes profuse sweating, which in a few minutes turns into an icy crust under the clothes. Moisture on the body in such cold weather meant certain death from hypothermia. The man would stop, assess the situation, and accept the inevitability of spending the night in the open field. This decision required iron will and absolute confidence in one's abilities. Instead of wasting energy cursing the elements, he turned to inner concentration. Many researchers have noted the ability of Native Americans to fall into a trance-like state. This allowed them to slow down their metabolism and reduce the body's need for oxygen and heat. The mind switched from a panic search for a way out to the methodical performance of memorized actions. Every movement became smooth, measured, and economical. Refusing to fight nature was not a surrender, but a strategic move. It was believed that a storm was a manifestation of a great force, of which man himself was a part. Resisting this force was a waste of resources needed for warmth. The warrior tuned in to become transparent to the wind, letting it pass by. This philosophical acceptance of the situation relieved muscle tension. Tense muscles are less well supplied with blood, which accelerates the process of frostbite in the extremities. Relaxing the body allowed for more even blood circulation, even in the peripheral areas. The psychological mindset of survival replaced the walls of a house and the warmth of a hearth. The belief that dawn would surely come was as tangible as clothing. This mental armor was the first layer of protection against the deadly cold. The experience of their ancestors suggested that fussing was the main enemy in extreme situations. Those who tried to search chaotically for a way out in the white fog quickly lost their bearings. Spinning in place in a blizzard depleted their strength in a matter of hours. Stopping meant maintaining control over the situation and their fate. It was a manifestation of the highest discipline of the spirit. Tribes had special practices for hardening not only the body, but also the mind. The ability to endure discomfort without complaint or internal protest was considered a sign of maturity. Cold was perceived not as pain, but as information from the environment. Interpreting this information without emotion allowed one to make the right decisions. Only a cool head could save a hot heart. The absence of self-pity was a key factor in this unequal struggle. Pity relaxes the will and causes a person to give up prematurely. The warrior knew that no one would come to his aid that night. The responsibility for his own life lay solely with him. This knowledge mobilized the hidden reserves of his body. Interestingly, modern survival experts confirm the effectiveness of this psychological attitude. Stress really kills faster in the cold than low temperatures. Ancient methods of managing fear work where modern technology fails. History knows many examples of people surviving only thanks to their strength of spirit. I'm very interested to hear your point of view. What do you think about the influence of the psyche on physical survival? Do you agree that attitude is more important than clothing? Write about it in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Are you ready to learn the truth about how to find shelter where there is none? The plain seems completely flat only to the inexperienced eye, but to a native, it is full of folds and shelters. In conditions of zero visibility, a warrior had to read the terrain with his feet and skin. The slightest change in wind direction indicated the presence of an obstacle or low ground. Instinct led him to where the fury of the storm was at least a little weaker. The main task was to find a place where the wind did not blow directly on the body. These could be dry riverbeds, ravines, or the leeward side of a hill. However, there was a deadly danger here that only experienced people knew about. Deep ravines could instantly fill with snow during a blizzard, burying a person alive. It was necessary to find a balance between shelter from the wind and the risk of being buried. Small depressions in the ground, washed out by rain, became safe havens. Even a half-meter difference in height created a zone of relative calm. The warrior would lie down in such a depression, checking how the air flowed above him. If the snow began to cover him too quickly, he had to change position. It was a constant game of chess with the elements. Shrubs and thickets of tough grass could also serve as landmarks and protection. They held back the snow, creating natural walls and shelters. A warrior could use them as a framework for his temporary shelter. Weaving his own body into the landscape required knowledge of the properties of plants. Some bushes could break under the weight of the snow, leaving a person unprotected. Orientation by the hardness of the snow underfoot also provided important information. On the leeward side, the snow was usually looser and deeper. On the windward slopes, it was compressed by the wind to the consistency of stone. These signs made it possible to determine the cardinal directions, even in complete darkness. Knowledge of the geography of one's native lands helped to mentally construct a map of shelters. Sometimes the best solution was not to look for natural shelter, but to create it. If the terrain was flat as a table, the tactic changed. The warrior would sit with his back to the wind, turning his own back into a shield. But choosing the right spot on this flat surface still mattered. It was necessary to avoid places where wind eddies formed. Rock outcrops and solitary boulders were a rare but valuable gift. A rock could serve as an excellent windbreak, but one could not press up against it too closely. Cold rock drew heat from the body faster than the icy air. It was necessary to leave a layer of snow or equipment between yourself and the rock. This required an understanding of the thermal conductivity of materials. In river floodplains where trees grew, the chances of survival increased significantly. Tree trunks broke up the wind, reducing its speed and lethal force. In addition, the snow fell more evenly in the forest, creating a soft bedding. However, going too far into the forest in the dark was risky because of the possibility of injury. The ability to find micro-relief saved lives where there was no obvious shelter. Every hillock, every bump was used to maximum effect. It was the art of seeing the invisible and using the small. Attention to detail became the difference between life and death. But simply finding a place was not enough. You had to use it correctly. Do you think it is possible to use snow itself to keep warm? In the next chapter, you will learn about a paradoxical way of survival. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of cold? For most people, snow is associated exclusively with freezing, but for indigenous peoples, it was a building material. Freshly fallen snow consists of ice crystals and a large amount of air. Air is one of the best insulators in nature when properly packed. Warriors use this property by literally burying themselves in the snow. This technique required overcoming the natural fear of immersing oneself in a cold mass. A person would dig a small cave or trench in a snowdrift or snowdrift. The size of this shelter had to be minimal, just enough to accommodate the body. The smaller the volume of air inside, the faster it would be heated by the warmth of the breath and body. A spacious cave in such a situation would become an icy crypt. The walls of such a shelter were compacted from the inside to create a wind barrier. Snow compressed by hand was turned into a kind of brickwork. The entrance was often covered with a bison's skin or cloak. If there was no skin, the entrance was blocked with blocks of snow, leaving only a tiny hole. This hole was critical for ventilation. Without access to fresh air, a person could simply suffocate in their sleep from carbon dioxide. The small hole allowed oxygen to enter, but did not let the precious heat escape. The temperature inside such a den could be close to 0 degrees. With an outside temperature of -40, this was a huge difference. Once inside, a person found themselves in a zone of relative comfort and silence. The howling of the storm outside became muffled and distant, which calmed the nerves. The heat emanating from the body was reflected off the snowy walls and returned back inside. The main danger was the snow melting from the body heat. If your clothes got wet from the meltwater, the insulation effect was lost. Therefore, the warrior had to lie down so that he touched the walls as little as possible. Often a saddle, shield, or branches were placed under him, if available. Insulation from the cold ground was more important than insulation from the air. The snow under the body was compacted, but it should not melt. This method, known as a snow grave, or quincy, was used by many northern peoples. It allowed them to survive the night even without warm clothing, if everything was done correctly. But it took courage to allow the snow to cover you. Psychologically, it resembled burial, but in reality, it was salvation. Sometimes, if there was not much snow, warriors would rake it into a pile to create an artificial snowdrift. This took precious energy, but the result was worth it. The work warmed the muscles before a long period of immobility. Once construction was complete, it was necessary to immediately take shelter inside. In the morning, the person would emerge from under the snow as if rising from the dead. The steam rising from the body was proof that the heat had been preserved. This technique was extreme, but incredibly effective in open plains. It turned a hostile environment into an ally. It is amazing how nature provides salvation even in its harshest manifestations. Be sure to like this if you are impressed by this survival technique. Guess what would happen to a warrior if he just put on everything he had? Native Americans understood the principle of layering clothing long before the invention of modern membrane fabrics. Their clothing didn't just keep them warm, it worked as a complex thermoregulation system. The basis of their wardrobe was soft, tanned leather, which provided excellent protection from the wind. But the secret lay in what was worn underneath and on top of it. In severe frosts, warriors wore several layers of clothing, creating air pockets. The air between the layers of leather or fur retained heat better than the clothing itself. However, the most important rule was to avoid overheating. If a person began to sweat, they immediately unbuttoned their collar or loosened their belt. Moisture had to evaporate without being absorbed into the inner layers. Belts and ties acted as valves in this clothing system. By tightening them, a warrior retained heat inside while at rest. By loosening them while moving, he provided ventilation and cooling. This required constant attention to one's sensations. The balance between warm and hot was very delicate. Special attention was paid to protecting the neck and wrists, where large blood vessels run close to the skin. The body loses a tremendous amount of heat through these areas. Wolf or coyote fur collars were used not for beauty, but for functionality. The fur of these animals did not freeze from breath and created a warm barrier for the face. Shoes and moccasins were stuffed with dry grass or moss for extra insulation. The grass created a porous structure around the foot, trapping warm air. If the grass got wet, it could be easily replaced, unlike a fur sock. Moccasins were soft and did not interfere with blood circulation in the foot. Tight shoes in the cold are a guarantee of rapid frostbite. Bison capes or robes were a universal survival tool. They were worn with the fur inside to retain heat or with the fur outside to protect against snow. The thick bison hide was virtually windproof. Such a cloak could serve as a tent, a blanket, and a mattress. Warriors knew that clothing should be loose enough. Compression of fabrics reduced their thermal insulation properties and impeded blood flow. A loose-fitting shirt allowed the hands to be pulled inside, close to the warm body, to warm the fingers. This posture was typical for many tribes during the winter. Leggings attached to the belt protected the legs but left the groin area ventilated during movement. This prevented excessive sweating in the hottest area of the body. This area was covered by a loincloth and the hem of the shirt. The design of the clothing was thought out in detail through centuries of experience. Caring for clothing was part of survival. It had to be shaken out of snow before going indoors or going to bed. Melted snow would soak into the leather, making it heavy and cold. Staying dry was a winter warrior's religion. Even the slightest carelessness could cost a life. As you can see, clothing was not just a thing, but a complex tool. But even the best clothing will not save you if you use it incorrectly. In the next chapter, you will learn why sleep could be a deadly enemy. When the shelter was finally ready and the clothing was in perfect order, the most crucial stage of static survival began. At this moment, a person would assume a special posture that is instinctively inherent in each of us by nature. It was the classic fetal position, as compact and closed as possible. The knees were pulled up almost to the chest, and the arms were tightly crossed, pressed against the torso. The head was tilted forward, the chin pressed against the chest. This grouping was necessary to minimize the total surface area of the body that gave off heat to the external environment. The smaller the area of contact with the cold air, the longer life was preserved. The warrior literally turned into a dense living ball, closed off from all winds. The main task on such a night was to protect the so-called core of the body. These are the vital organs located in the chest and abdominal cavities. Our body is designed so that the limbs, arms, and legs act as natural heat exchangers. In a critical situation, the body can sacrifice them to save the heart and brain. By pressing his arms and legs against his torso, the warrior closed the thermal circuit of his body. The armpits and groin area are the warmest areas, so they were used as natural heaters. There, they warmed their palms and feet when they began to lose sensitivity. This allowed blood to circulate in a small circle, conserving energy within the central part of the torso. It was very important to insulate oneself from the icy surface below. If there were no fir branches or leather saddles at hand, the warrior would sit on his own heels. Sometimes he had to sit with his legs crossed on a small piece of fur or cloth. Any direct contact of the body with the frozen ground sucked energy at a catastrophic rate. Every point of contact with the ground had to be protected by at least a thin layer of clothing. The Indians knew that the cold from the ground was much more dangerous than the cold from the frosty air. Therefore, they paid great attention to creating an air gap between themselves and the snow. Without such insulation, even the strongest man could only last a few hours. Muscle tremors at such moments were perceived not as an annoying nuisance, but as a natural heater. It was the only way for the body to generate additional heat through microscopic muscle contractions. However, constant and severe tremors very quickly deplete scarce energy reserves. Therefore, experienced warriors tried to consciously control this process. Instead of chaotic shaking, they used a method of periodically tensing and relaxing large muscles. Strong tension in the thigh or back muscles for a few seconds helped to warm up much more effectively. This was followed by a short relaxation to allow the muscles to rest. This tactic allowed them to maintain their temperature without unnecessary loss of strength. Human breathing on a cold night was also completely adapted to the new conditions. They tried to breathe in exclusively through the nose so that the frosty air had time to warm up a little in the nasopharynx. They usually exhaled into a high collar or a special fur muff. This created a kind of warm air cushion directly around the face. But at the same time, it was necessary to constantly monitor that the warm exhalation did not turn into icy condensation. If moisture from breathing wet the clothes on the chest, it would quickly turn to ice. This required constant control of the position of the head in the direction of exhalation. Every movement was calculated and conscious, despite fatigue. The warrior could remain in this seemingly uncomfortable position for long hours. Usually he fell into a state of semi-sleep, which allowed the body to rest a little. Deep sleep in such conditions was deadly dangerous due to the risk of severe hypothermia. If a person fell asleep too deeply, he could miss the moment when control over the body was lost. The warrior's brain remained in a special alert mode, reacting sensitively to any changes in temperature. If the cold began to penetrate too deeply, the person would wake up instantly. They would immediately change their body position or begin to actively tense their muscles to warm up. It was a delicate balance between sleep and constant self-control. Eyes were often kept closed in the dark to protect the delicate cornea from freezing. In strong, icy winds, the eyes quickly dry out and begin to hurt, depriving a person of their vision. Eyelashes could quickly freeze from breathing, sticking the eyelids together with an icy crust. Therefore, they had to be periodically cleaned by warming them with the fingertips. Protecting the eyes was critical to being able to continue moving in the morning. A warrior blinded by the cold was practically doomed to die alone. He would not be able to find the trail or see the dangers lurking in the forest. Therefore, they protected their eyesight as much as they protected the warmth of their hearts. Periodically, the warrior had to move his toes inside his moccasins. This helped maintain minimal blood flow and prevented his toes from going numb. This movement was done almost imperceptibly without moving the entire foot. The sensitivity of the toes was the main indicator of the general condition of the whole body. This long, static struggle for warmth required enormous patience. Time dragged on endlessly in the icy night, and dawn seemed unattainable. The ability to wait, curled up in a tight ball, was as important a skill as accurate shooting. It was a passive defense that allowed them to buy time until the first rays of the sun appeared. All of the body's internal resources were directed toward keeping the small flame of life burning. A person's outer shell may have been frozen and covered with frost, but life remained inside. Maintaining this inner fire required special fuel, which we will discuss later. In the next part, you will learn what food helped turn the stomach into a real stove. What if I showed you a time machine that transfers the energy of summer to winter? In stormy conditions, it was almost impossible and even dangerous to light an open fire. The wind blew out the flames, and the heat from the fire melted the snow, creating dampness. Therefore, the stomach became the source of heat, and special food became the fuel. Pemmican was the ideal winter fuel invented by indigenous peoples. It is a mixture of dried and ground bison meat, fat, and sometimes berries. Pemmican had incredible energy density and could be stored for years. A small piece of this product provided the body with a huge amount of calories. The fat in pemmican was digested slowly, providing a long-lasting supply of energy. The process of digesting heavy food itself causes heat to be released inside the body. Warriors called this feeding the inner fire. By eating a portion of pemmican before bed, a person would have an internal stove for several hours. Unlike sugar or carbohydrates, which provide a quick burst of energy, fat burns slowly and evenly. This was critical for survival during the long winter nights. The lack of such food reserves drastically reduced the chances of survival. A hungry person freezes much faster than a well-fed one. Water was another problem. It was impossible to eat snow in its pure form. Icy snow cools the mouth and esophagus, taking away precious core heat. In addition, melting ice crystals requires a lot of energy from the body. Snow had to be melted in the palm of the hand or in a flask under clothing before drinking. Dehydration in the cold creeps up on you, but it's deadly. Dry, cold air pulls moisture from your lungs with every breath. Your blood gets thicker and doesn't flow as well through small vessels, speeding up frostbite. So warriors had to force themselves to drink, even if they weren't thirsty. Some tribes chewed fat or pieces of skin to stave off hunger and stimulate salivation. This did not provide energy, but it helped keep the body in good shape. The movement of the jaws also warmed the facial muscles slightly and improved blood circulation to the head. Rations were strictly rationed. You couldn't eat everything at once. Portions were divided into small pieces to maintain metabolism throughout the night. Discipline in eating was part of the overall survival strategy. Overeating could lead to drowsiness, which was dangerous. Knowledge of the body and its needs was passed down from elders to the young. They knew that food was not a pleasure, but a tool, just like a knife or a spear. Proper use of this tool saved lives. Pemmican was a strategic reserve that was always carried in a belt pouch. Without an external fire, a person relied solely on their biological resources. The effectiveness of this method has been proven by centuries of life on the plains. But in addition to food and clothing, equipment that was used in non-standard ways played an important role. In the next chapter, you will learn how ordinary things change their purpose. The things that surrounded a warrior in everyday life suddenly took on a whole new and vital meaning during a snowstorm. In normal times, they were simply tools for hunting or war, but in the icy captivity, every piece of equipment was considered solely in terms of its usefulness for warmth. A shield made of thick, tough old bison hide ceased to be a defense against enemy arrows at such moments. It became a reliable barrier against the piercing wind or an effective shovel for clearing snow. Its rigid and slightly curved design allowed the warrior to quickly prepare a place to sleep by shoveling deep snowdrifts down to the ground. Later, the shield was placed so that it covered the entrance to the shelter, creating a barrier against the icy dust. This simple device helped to retain the accumulated heat inside, preventing drafts from blowing away the energy. The saddle, if a faithful horse was nearby or, unfortunately, had fallen, was used as an ideal insulated seat. The wooden frame and thick leather upholstery of the saddle perfectly separated the human body from the frozen ground. Resting one's head on the edge of the saddle instead of a pillow meant reliably protecting the neck and back of the head from direct contact with the snow. It was a small but incredibly valuable island of safety and comfort in the midst of an endless sea of cold. In survival conditions, even a detail such as a saddle saved important nerve centers at the back of the head from hypothermia. If a warrior had snowshoes with him, they were also immediately put to use. They were often used as an improvised frame for a small canopy, with an animal skin or thick blanket thrown over the top. You could also simply sit on them, creating an additional air layer between yourself and the icy surface. Snowshoes on a winter hike were always considered a multifunctional tool, not just footwear for movement. Animal skins, which usually served as blankets for horses, were immediately put to use by humans in an emergency. The pungent smell of animal, sweat, and dust was of no importance whatsoever when it came to saving lives. The coarser and thicker the wool on such a skin, the better it retained the snow sticking to the outside, leaving a dry air layer inside. Warriors literally wrapped themselves in these blankets, creating several layers of insulation around themselves. The long pile kept warm air close to the body, preventing it from cooling down quickly in the cold. Ropes woven from durable rawhide were used to carefully tie the elements of clothing together. This was necessary to completely eliminate even the slightest draft of icy wind under the jacket or pants. They tightly tied the bottom of the moccasin legs in sleeve cuffs, creating a kind of airtight suit. Any gap in clothing, even the tiniest one, became a dangerous channel through which life literally flowed out. It is worth remembering that raw leather instantly hardened in severe frost and became as stiff as wood. Therefore, all important knots were tied in advance in the warmth, or special loops were used that could be tightened with one hand. Each knot had to be secure so that it would not come undone at the most inopportune moment. A sharp knife was absolutely necessary for gathering pine branches or quickly cutting through frozen leather straps. However, the metal parts of any weapon posed a serious hidden danger in such weather. Touching bare, wet hands to exposed metal at -40 degrees caused an instant and painful thermal burn. Therefore, warriors wrapped all knife handles and visible parts of blades with strips of leather or thin fabric in advance. They tried to hide metal objects deep in their belongings or under layers of skins so as not to accidentally touch them with their skin while sleeping. Safety in small things was the key to ensuring that a warrior would live to see the morning without unnecessary injuries. A heavy quiver of arrows also found its use, serving as a convenient headrest or additional insulation for the back. The Indians tried to keep their battle bows as close to their bodies as possible, warm under their clothes. The fact is that in severe frost, wood became extremely brittle and could simply break when trying to pull the bowstring. Keeping weapons in working order was important, not for hunting in a storm, but for protection immediately after the weather cleared. Even personal amulets, sacred pouches, and jewelry played an important role during these hours. Pouches with dried herbs, bird feathers, and bone beads reminded the warrior of his inseparable connection with the tribe and the great spirits. In a situation of complete sensory deprivation, when only endless white fog was visible around, these items helped to maintain clarity of mind. Psychological support and belief in the protection of ancestors were no less important at such a moment than physical warmth. These items reminded a person of home, of the warmth of the family hearth, and of what was worth fighting for in life. This mental connection prevented the warrior from giving up and simply falling asleep in the snow forever. In the arsenal of an experienced nomad, almost every item had a dual or even triple purpose. The ability to quickly see these hidden possibilities distinguished a veteran of many expeditions from an inexperienced novice. Ingenuity in using even the most meager set of items was the main key to successful adaptation. They never carried anything extra with them, as every extra kilogram took away their strength on the road. But all the items that were included in the camping kit always worked at 100% of their potential. The competent use of improvised means turned tedious and passive waiting into an active and conscious struggle for life. The warrior constantly tried to improve his situation by repairing skins or strengthening the walls of his temporary shelter. He did not stand still, but continued to act, using everything that was at hand at this critical moment. But the hardest and most dangerous part of his ordeal with the cold was still ahead. Dawn was approaching. Be sure to write in the comments if you knew about these ways to use everyday items. In the next part, we will discuss how the first rays of the sun could be both a salvation and a new threat for the warrior. The coldest time of the day comes just before dawn. It is at this hour, when the body's strength is already depleted from the night's struggle, that the frost delivers its final, crushing blow. The air temperature drops to its lowest point, and the wind often picks up. Many froze to death in this pre-dawn hour, when salvation seemed so close. Waking up in a snow shelter required tremendous willpower. The body, frozen in one position, refused to obey, and the muscles were stiff. The first movements caused sharp pain, but it was necessary to move. Remaining motionless when the body's protective resources were exhausted meant falling asleep forever. The warrior had to get out from under the snow, which could turn into a hard crust overnight. Breaking through this shell required physical effort that got the blood flowing. However, sudden movements could damage frozen tissue. It was necessary to move smoothly, gradually increasing the amplitude. It was critically important to assess one's condition, to check the sensitivity of the fingers, toes, nose, and ears. If sensitivity was lost, the fight against frostbite began. Rubbing frozen areas with snow was strictly prohibited. Sharp ice crystals tore the fragile skin. It was necessary to warm up only with body heat or breath. Clothes could become saturated with body moisture overnight and freeze. This icy shell had to be broken up to restore the fabric's flexibility and thermal insulation properties. Sometimes it was necessary to change clothes or rewind foot cloths, which was an extremely risky operation in the wind. Every second of exposed skin in the cold was costly. Psychologically, dawn could bring disappointment if the storm had not subsided. The sight of the continuing blizzard could break the will of those who hoped for a quick end to the ordeal. Warriors prepared themselves for the storm to last several days. The absence of false hopes helped them accept reality. If a warrior had food reserves left, he would eat them in the morning to give his body fuel for movement. Waking up hungry deprived him of strength and motivation. The last piece of pemmican could be the deciding factor in setting out on the journey. Scanning the horizon and searching for landmarks became possible only with the appearance of light. The world after the storm was changed beyond recognition. Familiar hills disappeared under snowdrifts. Ravines became traps. It was necessary to relearn how to read the terrain. A mistaken navigation in the morning could be fatal. The first steps were difficult, but rhythmic walking gradually brought the body back to life. It was important not to sweat again when starting to move actively. Regulating the pace of walking became the main task for the first hours of the journey. The morning was the moment of truth. Either you get up and go, or you remain part of the snowy plain forever. This transition from static to dynamic was the most difficult physiological process. The journey home after a difficult night in the snow could take many hours, or even several days. The warrior walked, trying to conserve every movement as much as possible because his strength was running out. He chose the windward sides of hills and elevations, where the constant wind made the snow dense and hard. In such areas, his feet did not sink, which allowed him to maintain a steady pace. The deep, loose snow in the lowlands became an exhausting obstacle, capable of consuming his last calories. In these conditions, the use of snowshoes gave the hunter a decisive advantage over the elements. They allowed him to literally glide over the surface of the snowdrifts without wasting energy, pulling his feet out of deep pits. Without this simple device, the journey home could have been his last test. The long-awaited meeting with fellow tribesmen or the return to their native camp did not mean instant salvation. There was a serious danger. Suddenly entering a hot room could cause temperature shock. A person's heart, working at its limit, could simply stop from the sudden expansion of blood vessels. Therefore, the return to life always followed certain rules. The injured warrior was warmed very slowly and gradually so that the body had time to adapt to the change. He was given plenty of warm drinks, but never boiling water, which could burn the mucous membrane. The person was wrapped in dry, soft skins, which slowly restored the body's natural warmth. It was strictly forbidden to immediately bring a frozen person to an open, strong fire or hot coals. Traditional medicine of the northern tribes had a rich arsenal of effective remedies for treating frostbite. Special ointments made from animal fat and medicinal forest herbs were used. These compounds promoted rapid restoration of blood circulation in damaged tissues and accelerated their healing. The fat created a protective film that prevented the wounds from drying out and cracking. Experienced tribal healers knew exactly how to save even severely blackened fingers and toes. If the tissue destruction process had not gone too far, the person could be completely restored to health. Amputation was considered an extreme and very rare measure, resorted to only in desperate situations. They tried to keep every warrior as a full member of the community. The experience of such an extreme overnight stay changed a person forever, making them more respected in the eyes of their fellow tribesmen. They had successfully passed a severe test of spirit and proved their incredible resilience in the face of death. Such stories were carefully preserved and passed on to young people as invaluable lessons in practical survival. The elders carefully analyzed every detail of the story, every mistake made, and every successful decision. Psychological recovery after icy captivity also required a certain amount of time and patience. The stress he had experienced and the realization that he had come close to death left a deep mark on the man's character. Special purification rituals and words of gratitude to the spirits were performed to help the warrior regain his mental balance. The man gradually returned to his normal life, but he would forever remember the cold breath of the winter night. The collective support of the entire community played a huge role for the survivor at such moments. The tribe showed sincere concern for the victim, selflessly sharing with him the best food and accumulated warmth. The clear understanding that you are loved, waited for, and valued gave the warrior strength on his way back through the snowy desert. A lone warrior on the plain was extremely vulnerable, but a member of the tribe always felt the invisible support of his clan behind him. Once recovered from frostbite, the warrior became the bearer of unique and vital knowledge. Next time, he was ready to face any storm even more prepared and calm. Adapting to the harsh environment was a continuous process of learning through physical pain and overcoming fear. Each such victory over the cold strengthened the position of the entire people in their struggle for existence. Nature never forgave weakness or carelessness, but it always respected true strength and a wise approach. Those who managed to survive in impossible conditions became heroes of legends and reliable guardians of tribal traditions. Their personal experience became the foundation on which the survival of the entire people in these harsh, northern latitudes was built. Every life saved was a small victory over the great cold. For these people, survival was not a one-time heroic feat, but a natural norm of everyday life. From early childhood, every man, woman, and even small child knew exactly what to do. They understood the algorithm of actions in case the White Death came in the form of a sudden blizzard. These skills were considered much more important and valuable in the tribe than the ability to wield combat weapons. Returning to the family hearth was always seen as a great victory of life over inevitable death. But everyone understood that this victory was only a temporary respite before the next violent storm. Living in harmony with nature required constant vigilance and readiness for new challenges. Preparations for the next challenge from the elements had to begin immediately after the previous one ended. Want to know what other secrets ancient warriors hid in their struggle for life in the icy desert? Write in the comments which fact about saving yourself from the cold impressed you the most. Your opinion helps us make our historical stories even more detailed and exciting. In the next series, we will talk about how the equipment of northern peoples has changed over the centuries. You will see what innovations helped people finally conquer the coldest corners of our planet. Don't miss the continuation of our story about the great confrontation between man and nature. The survival methods of Native Americans are striking in their rationality and effectiveness. They did not fight nature, but used its laws to their advantage. Snow, wind, cold, all of this became a resource in skilled hands. Modern survival science largely confirms what Native Americans have known for centuries. The principle of layering clothing is now used by all manufacturers of sports and military equipment. Building snow shelters is part of the mandatory training program for special forces and mountaineers. Psychological preparation and panic control are considered the basis for survival in any extreme situation. Eating high-calorie fats in cold climates is a recognized dietary norm for expeditions. Pemmican became the progenitor of modern energy bars and freeze-dried food. Knowledge of medicinal herbs and the treatment of frostbite is studied by modern pharmacology. But the most important legacy is the philosophy of relating to the world. Understanding one's place in nature, respect for the elements, and the absence of human arrogance in the face of the universe. This wisdom allows one to remain calm where others lose their minds. We often rely on technology, forgetting the capabilities of our own bodies and spirits. The history of tribal survival reminds us that humans are incredibly resilient creatures. Our ancestors survived in conditions that seem unimaginable to us, with only primitive tools at their disposal. These skills have not become obsolete. They have transformed, but their essence remains the same. In any critical situation, A person's main weapons are their mind and will. Technology can fail, batteries can run out, and clothes can tear. But knowledge and spirit cannot be taken away. By studying the experience of indigenous peoples, we learn not just to survive, but to live in harmony with the harsh world. It is a lesson in humility and strength at the same time. We see that comfort is not a guarantee of safety, but the ability to adapt is the highest value. The Great Plains hold the memory of thousands of such nights. Lonely figures in the white mist, waiting out the storm, have become a symbol of the resilience of the human race. Their silent feat is inscribed in the history of the continent. I hope this story has made you look at familiar things, snow, cold, and your own clothes, in a new way. Perhaps someday this knowledge, passed down through the centuries, will help you too. After all, winter is always close. We have come a long way together through the icy night, full of dangers and hidden opportunities. You have learned how fear kills faster than cold and how snow can become a warm blanket. These ancient techniques prove that the human mind is capable of finding a way out of even the most hopeless situation. We have much to learn from those who called the harsh plains their home. What other survival secrets of ancient peoples would you be interested in learning about? Would you like to know how they obtained water in the desert or navigated the endless forests? Suggest topics for future videos in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new exciting stories.